Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. The following content is provided for educational and entertainment purposes only. This video explores historical trends, demographic data, and sociological shifts, and does not constitute legal, financial, or psychological advice. Divorce laws vary significantly by state and individual circumstances, and the data presented reflects general population trends rather than specific outcomes. Viewers are strongly encouraged to conduct their own due diligence and consult with qualified professionals, such as family law attorneys or financial advisors, before making any life-altering decisions based on the information provided. Imagine a room filled with 1,000 married couples in the year 1900. Statistically, only about 4 of those couples would ever see the inside of a divorce court. Now, fast forward to the early 1980s, and that number doesn't just double or triple, it explodes by over 500%. For decades, we have been told that 50% of all American marriages are destined to fail, a statistic that has become a permanent fixture in our cultural psyche. But what if I told you that this terrifying coin flip of marital success is actually a ghost of the past? In fact, while you were looking the other way, the divorce rate for younger Americans has been quietly plummeting to its lowest point in over half a century. We are currently living through a massive silent inversion of the American family structure. Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on a century of data to understand why the divorce revolution happened, why it is ending for some but accelerating for others, and what the actual potential outcomes are for a marriage starting in 2026. This is the masterclass on the demographics of change. To understand where we are today, we have to look at the sheer magnitude of the shift that occurred between 1900 and 1980. At the turn of the 20th century, divorce was not just legally difficult, it was a social death sentence. In 1900, the rate of women experiencing a divorce was approximately 4.1 per 1,000 married women. Marriage was viewed primarily as an economic and reproductive contract, rather than a vehicle for individual self-actualization. If a marriage was unhappy, the fault had to be proven in court, involving grueling public testimonies of adultery, desertion, or extreme cruelty. However, the middle of the century acted as a pressure cooker. Following World War II, the United States saw a temporary spike in divorces as hasty wartime marriages met the reality of post-war civilian life. Yet, the 1950s actually saw a stabilization of the nuclear family, driven by a booming post-war economy and a doubling down on traditional social messaging. The crude divorce rate, the number of divorces per 1,000 people in the total population, sat at a relatively low 2.2 in 1960. Everything changed in the 1970s. This decade is often referred to by sociologists as the divorce revolution. The catalyst was not just a change in feelings, but a seismic shift in legal policy. In 1969, California Governor Ronald Reagan signed the first no-fault divorce law in the nation. Before this, you needed a villain to get a divorce. After this, you simply needed irreconcilable differences. By the end of the 1970s, the majority of U.S. states had followed suit. The impact was immediate and massive. By 1980, the crude divorce rate had spiked to 5.2 per 1,000 people, a 136% increase from just 20 years prior. This era is where the 50% myth was born. During the late 70s and early 80s, the divorce rate hit its historical peak of 22.6 per 1,000 married women. If you were getting married in 1980, the statistical likelihood of your marriage ending was at its absolute highest in American history. Case studies from this era show a generation of women who, for the first time, had the legal and economic autonomy to leave abusive or deeply unhappy situations. Historical trends indicate that as women entered the workforce in record numbers and gained the right to hold their own bank accounts and credit cards, the economic necessity of staying in a bad marriage evaporated. But here is where the story takes a turn that most people miss. Since that 1980 peak, the overall divorce rate in America has been on a long, steady decline. By 2022, the divorce rate for women had dropped to 14.6 per 1,000 married women. As of early 2026, provisional data shows the U.S. divorce rate remains at a historic low of approximately 2.4 divorces per 1,000 total people. Why is this happening? It isn't because marriage has suddenly become perfect again. It's because the demographics of who is getting married have shifted. We are seeing a trend toward selective marriage. Millennials and Gen Z are waiting significantly longer to tie the knot. In 1960, the median age for a first marriage was 20 for women and 23 for men. Today, those ages have climbed to 27 for women and 29 for men. By waiting longer, These cohorts often achieve higher levels of education and financial stability before marrying, two factors that are statistically correlated with lower divorce rates. Furthermore, we must examine the education gap in marital stability. Data from 2022 highlights a fascinating disparity. Ever-married women with a bachelor's degree or higher had the lowest percentage of separation or divorce at just 16%. In contrast, those with some college education but no degree saw rates as high as 23%. This suggests that marriage is increasingly becoming an achievement or a capstone to a stable life, rather than the starting point of adulthood. However, while the younger demographic is killing divorce, another group is doing the exact opposite. This is the phenomenon known as gray divorce. While overall rates are down, the divorce rate for adults aged 65 and older has nearly tripled since 1990. In 1990, only about 5% of those over 65 were divorcing. By 2022, that number rose to over 15%. This graying of divorce represents a fundamental shift in how we view the second half of life. Older Americans, often in their second or third marriages, which are statistically less stable than first marriages, are choosing personal happiness and autonomy over the traditional, until death do us part model, especially as life expectancy increases and the social stigma of divorce continues to fade. Throughout this deep dive, we will explore the specific socioeconomic drivers behind these numbers. We will look at how race and ethnicity play a role, noting that as of 2022, Asian American women had the lowest shares of separation or divorce at 10%, while Black women saw a peak of 35% in 2010 before beginning a slight decline. We will also analyze the pandemic effect. The strange dip in 2020 when courts were closed and uncertainty was high, followed by the resurgence and eventual stabilization we are seeing in 2026. By understanding these historical trends and the shifting demographic landscape, we can move past the scary headlines and understand the actual state of the American family. This isn't just about failed relationships. It's about a century of evolving values, legal revolutions, and the pursuit of individual satisfaction in a landscape that looks nothing like it did in 1900. Over the next 9 parts of this masterclass, we will break down the financial, legal, and social mechanics of this change, so you can understand the reality of the 21st century American household. To truly grasp why the American family looks the way it does in 2026, we must peel back the layers of the Great Divergence, a sociological phenomenon that has effectively split the marriage market into 2 distinct realities based on educational attainment. Imagine a woman named Sarah living in a major metropolitan hub like Austin, Texas. Sarah is 32 years old, holds a master's degree in biotechnology, and has spent the last decade establishing her career. When Sarah decides to marry her partner, Mark, who is also a college-educated professional, their statistical probability of staying married for 20 years or more is significantly higher than any other demographic in the country. This isn't a matter of luck. It is a reflection of what researchers call the marriage gap. Historical trends show that since the late 1980s, a college degree has become the most reliable predictor of marital stability. In the mid-20th century, divorce was relatively egalitarian. It happened at similar rates across different social classes. However, by the early 2000s, the data began to show a massive schism. For those with a 4-year degree, the divorce rate has plummeted by nearly 30% since its peak. For those without a degree, the rate has remained stubbornly high or even increased in specific pockets of the country. This creates a feedback loop of stability. Sarah and Mark enter their marriage with high dual incomes, the ability to outsource stressful household labor, and a shared social network that reinforces their commitment. Their potential outcomes are rooted in economic security, which acts as a shock absorber for the inevitable stressors of life. Now imagine another individual, John, living in a rural town in the Midwest. John entered the workforce directly after high school and works in a manufacturing sector that has seen significant volatility over the last 20 years. John marries at 22, driven by the desire for traditional stability. However, without the buffer of a higher education or a high-paying specialized skill set, John and his spouse face a different set of pressures. When a local plant closes or inflation spikes, the financial strain translates directly into marital conflict. Historical trends suggest that for individuals like John, marriage is often entered into with fewer financial resources and less social support, leading to a much higher risk of dissolution within the first 7 years. Case studies of working-class communities in the 2020s show that as the manufacturing base shifted, the marriage rate dropped and the divorce rate climbed, not because of a lack of moral will, but because the economic foundation of the household was precarious from day one. This educational divide is further complicated by the rise of the independent woman, a demographic shift that has fundamentally altered the power dynamics within the American home. In 1970, only about 40% of women were in the labor force. Today, in 2026, that number has surged, with women making up nearly half of the total workforce and, crucially, earning the majority of undergraduate and graduate degrees. This economic empowerment means that the traditional marriage of the 1950s, the breadwinner homemaker model, is largely a relic of the past. When women have the financial means to support themselves, the cost of leaving an unhappy or stagnant marriage decreases. We see this reflected in the data regarding who actually initiates divorce. In approximately 70% of cases in the United States, it is the woman who files. Among college-educated women, that number jumps to nearly 90%. This isn't necessarily a sign of societal breakdown, but rather a sign of increased standards. Women in 2026 are no longer bound to a marriage for survival. Instead, they are looking for what sociologists call the individualized marriage, a partnership based on mutual growth, emotional intimacy, and shared goals. If those elements are missing, the modern American woman is statistically more likely to choose singlehood over a subpar partnership. This has led to a fascinating demographic inversion where the most educated women are the most likely to marry and stay married, but also the most likely to initiate a divorce if the relationship fails to meet their high expectations for emotional and intellectual parity. Furthermore, we must look at the impact of the age of first marriage. In 1960, the average American was married by the time they could legally drink. By 2026, the median age has pushed toward 30. This decade of delay is a primary driver in the overall decline of the national divorce rate. When people marry in their late 20s or early 30s, they have a more solidified sense of self. They have likely navigated at least one major career transition and several serious relationships. This maturity translates into better partner selection. Step by step, as an individual moves from their early 20s into their 30s, their prefrontal cortex fully develops, their financial literacy usually improves, and their ability to resolve conflict matures. These are the internal demographic shifts that are driving the external numbers down for the younger generations. However, we cannot ignore the geographic demographics. Divorce in America is not a monolith. It is a patchwork. If you look at a heat map of divorce rates across the United States, you see a clear pattern. The Bible Belt, specifically states like Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Alabama, often report some of the highest divorce rates in the country. This seems counterintuitive given the religious emphasis on the sanctity of marriage in these regions. But the data reveals a secondary story. People in these states marry much younger than their counterparts in New York or Massachusetts. Because they marry younger and often with less financial preparation, they fall victim to the very trends we just discussed. In contrast, states like New Jersey and Illinois have some of the lowest divorce rates, largely because their populations tend to delay marriage until they have achieved higher educational and career milestones. As we move through 2026, we are also seeing the emergence of the digital demographic. This is the first generation where a significant portion of marriages began on a smartphone. Research is currently exploring whether the source of the meeting influences the longevity of the marriage. Early case studies suggest that couples who meet through intentional dating apps, where values and preferences are screened up front, may actually have a slight edge in compatibility over those who meet through chance encounters. This is the digitization of the demographic, where data-driven matching is attempting to solve the problem of human incompatibility before the first date even happens. But even with better matching and higher education, there is a looming shadow over the American household: the cost of the split. While we have focused on why people leave, we have yet to touch on the massive economic machinery that kicks in the moment the paperwork is filed. The demographics of divorce are not just about who leaves, but what they leave behind and what they are forced to give up. This brings us to a critical junction in our deep dive. We have looked at the sociology of the shift, but we haven't looked at the cold, hard math of the aftermath. How does the sudden division of assets in a 2026 economy, one defined by high housing costs and complex retirement accounts, alter the life trajectory of the American family? And why are we seeing a surge in people who are separated but cannot afford to actually finalize their divorce? The answer lies in the intersection of family law and the modern cost of living, a reality that is trapping thousands of couples in a legal limbo. In the next part, we will break down the true cost of a century of change, exploring how the financial stakes have evolved from a simple division of the family farm to the high-stakes world of digital assets. For 01KS, and the crushing weight of the two-household lifestyle. The financial architecture of the American divorce has undergone a total structural transformation since the 1920s. In the early 20th century, asset division was relatively straightforward because wealth was primarily tangible. If a couple in 1926 decided to part ways, the negotiation centered on physical property: the family farm, livestock, maybe a modest bank account, and household furniture. There were no complex retirement vehicles, no digital currencies, and certainly no intellectual property valuations to consider. Fast forward to 2026, and the financial landscape of a split has become a high-stakes forensic exercise. Imagine a couple named David and Jennifer living in a suburb of Seattle. David is a senior project manager at a tech firm, and Jennifer is a specialized healthcare consultant. Over 15 years of marriage, they haven't just accumulated a house and some cars. Their balance sheet is a dense web of 401ks, Roth IRAs, unvested stock options, health savings accounts, and even a shared portfolio of cryptocurrency. When they decide to file for divorce in 2026, they aren't just dividing a life. They are performing a surgical separation of two deeply integrated financial ecosystems. In modern America, the potential outcomes of a divorce are often dictated more by the sophistication of one's financial planning than by the emotional reasons for the split. The first major hurdle in this modern demographic shift is the valuation of the primary residence. Historically, the family home was an asset that most couples could afford to sell or buy the other person out of. However, in the 2026 real estate market, characterized by years of inventory shortages and high valuations, the home has become a golden cage. Case studies in 2026 show an increasing number of couples who are emotionally separated but remain cohabitating because neither can afford to secure a new mortgage at current interest rates while also paying out the equity to their spouse. This has led to the rise of birdnesting, a demographic trend where the children stay in the family home while the parents rotate in and out, sharing a secondary, smaller apartment. The financial burden of maintaining two separate households in a high cost of living era has effectively slowed the actualization of divorce for many middle-class families. Beyond the physical home, we have to look at the invisible assets, retirement accounts and pensions. In the 1970s, many workers had defined benefit pensions provided by their employers. Dividing these was a matter of actuarial math. Today, most Americans rely on defined contribution plans like the 401k. These accounts are subject to market volatility and complex tax implications. If David has a 401k valued at $500,000, Jennifer is legally entitled to a portion of that under the principle of equitable distribution or community property, depending on their state. To move that money without incurring a massive IRS penalty, they must use a Qualified Domestic Relations Order, or QDRO. This legal instrument is a staple of the 2026 divorce process. Yet it is a step-by-step technical nightmare that requires both a lawyer and a financial expert to execute correctly. One small error in the drafting of a QDRO can result in a tax liability that wipes out years of growth. Then there is the issue of the two-household lifestyle. Historical trends indicate that divorce is one of the most significant drivers of downward social mobility for women and children. When a single income that supported one roof is suddenly split to support two, the math rarely works out in favor of the status quo. Data from 2024 and 2025 shows that on average, a woman's standard of living drops by roughly 27% following a divorce, while a man's can actually see a slight increase in some scenarios due to lower household expenses and the lack of primary childcare costs. By 2026, the rise of the gig economy and freelance work has made calculating alimony and child support even more difficult. Unlike the steady paychecks of 1950, today's incomes are often variable. If Jennifer's consulting income fluctuates by 40% year over year, setting a fixed monthly support payment becomes a point of intense legal friction. We also cannot overlook the demographic impact of debt. In 1926, the average couple had very little consumer debt. In 2026, the average American couple is carrying a cocktail of student loans, credit card balances, and auto financing. In many modern divorces, the couple isn't fighting over who gets the money. They are fighting over who is responsible for the debt. If David took out $100,000 in student loans to get his MBA during the marriage, is that Jennifer's debt too? In most states, the answer is yes, as it was a debt incurred for the benefit of the marital unit's future earning potential. This realization often leads to what we call the deadlocked marriage, where couples realize that the financial cost of disentangling their liabilities is higher than the perceived benefit of being single. Case studies from 2026 also reveal a new frontier: the division of digital lives. This includes everything from the ownership of a monetized YouTube channel or social media presence to the points accumulated in a premium travel rewards program. While these might seem trivial compared to a house, for a modern professional couple, these assets can be worth tens of thousands of dollars. The step-by-step process of auditing a digital life for divorce involves tracking down every subscription, every loyalty program, and every digital wallet. The complexity of these audits has given rise to a new profession within the demographic: the digital forensic divorce accountant. All of these financial pressures have contributed to a significant demographic delay. People aren't just getting married later, they are staying in dead marriages longer for purely economic reasons. This is the era of the strategic separation. Couples might live apart, date other people, and lead completely separate lives, but they remain legally married to maintain health insurance benefits or to wait for a more favorable tax year to sell their assets. In 2026, the legal status of marriage is often maintained as a financial contract long after the emotional contract has been shredded. This financial entanglement is the primary reason why the messy divorce has become a cultural trope. It isn't just about the anger between the two people. It's about the sheer complexity of the math required to settle the score. Every asset is a potential battlefield, and every debt is a potential trap. But what happens when the financial dust finally settles? What is left of the family structure? And specifically, what happens to the children who are caught in the crossfire of this century-long demographic shift? As we move into the next part of this deep dive, we have to look at the psychological and developmental demographics. If the 1980s were the era of the latchkey kid, 2026 is the era of the co-parenting app and the blended family experiment. How have 100 years of changing divorce rates reshaped the way the next generation views commitment? Are we raising a generation that is divorce-proof because they have seen the cost of the split, or are we seeing a permanent decline in the desire for legal partnership altogether? The answer lies in the data of the children of the divorce revolution, and the results are not what you might expect. The psychological demographics of the American family have undergone a radical recalibration since the peak of the divorce revolution in the 1980s. To understand the children of that era, we must look at the transition from the silent generation's approach to the millennials' reactionary stability. Imagine a child named Michael growing up in 1985. For Michael, divorce was often a sudden, catastrophic event that resulted in a clean break from one parent, typically the father. In the mid-1980s, sole maternal custody was the default legal standard in the vast majority of U.S. jurisdictions. Michael likely became a latchkey kid, navigating an empty house after school while his mother worked multiple jobs to make up for the loss of a primary income. The psychological profile of that generation was defined by a high degree of independence, but also a profound skepticism toward the institution of marriage. Fast forward to 2026, and we are seeing the potential outcomes of that skepticism. Michael is now 41 years old, and his approach to parenting and partnership is diametrically opposed to that of his parents. This is what sociologists call the cautious cohort. Because Michael witnessed the financial and emotional fallout of a high-conflict split, he delayed marriage until his 30s, focused on a stable career path, and engaged in several years of cohabitation before signing a legal contract. For Michael's generation, cohabitation has become a functional substitute for early marriage. In 1970, only about 500,000 couples lived together without being married. By 2026, that number has surged to over 20 million. This demographic shift acts as a filter. Many relationships that would have ended in divorce in the 1970s now end as a breakup in the cohabitation phase, never making it into the official divorce statistics. This is one of the primary reasons why the divorce rate for younger Americans appears to be plummeting. The riskier partnerships are being weeded out before the state ever gets involved. Now, consider the experience of a child in 2026 named Chloe. Chloe's parents, like Michael, are part of a demographic that views divorce through a lens of high conflict management rather than abandonment. When Chloe's parents decide to separate, they don't use the clean break model of 1985. Instead, they utilize a co-parenting plan managed through specialized software. In 2026, the legal default in many states has shifted toward 50-50 joint physical custody. Case studies from this year show that children like Chloe often move between two fully functional households every week. This has created a new demographic of children who are highly adaptable and tech-literate, but also face the unique stress of dual residency life. The psychological data suggests that while these children are less likely to experience the total loss of a parent, They are more likely to deal with the logistical exhaustion of a bifurcated schedule. We must also examine the step-by-step evolution of the blended family demographic. In the mid-20th century, a stepfamily was usually the result of widowhood. Today, it is almost exclusively the result of divorce and remarriage. Historical trends indicate that approximately 40% of all new marriages in the United States involve at least one partner who has been married before. However, the data on second and third marriages is sobering. While first marriages in 2026 have a failure rate that is trending downward, second marriages still face a nearly 60% probability of dissolution, and third marriages jump to over 70%. This is often attributed to the complexity of blending households. When you introduce children from previous relationships, the demographic stressors multiply. Step by step, the management of different parenting styles, the continued interaction with ex-spouses, and the division of resources between biological and stepchildren create a volatility that first-time marriages simply do not have. Case studies in 2026 highlight a specific phenomenon known as the sandwich generation of divorce. These are adults who are simultaneously managing the fallout of their own marital transitions, while also caring for elderly parents who are going through a gray divorce. As we noted previously, the divorce rate for those over 65 is climbing. This means that an adult in their early 40s might be helping their mother move into a new apartment after 40 years of marriage, while also coordinating their own child's soccer schedule with an ex-husband. The emotional and financial drain on this specific demographic is unprecedented in American history. It represents a total restructuring of the support network that used to define the American middle class. Furthermore, we need to analyze the demographic impact of the never-married population. In 2026, we are seeing a record-high percentage of 40-year-olds who have never married. In 1960, only 9% of adults aged 25 and older had never been married. Today, that number is approaching 25%. This isn't just a delay. For a significant portion of the population, it is a permanent choice. The potential outcomes of this shift are profound for the future of the U.S. economy. A demographic that doesn't marry and doesn't divorce still consumes, but their consumption patterns are different. They are more likely to live in urban centers, more likely to rent rather than own, and more likely to invest in experiences over long-term physical assets. This is the rise of the independent consumer, a group that is largely immune to the divorce demographics we are studying because they have opted out of the system entirely. But for those who do stay in the system, the 2026 landscape offers a tool that Michael's parents could never have imagined: the mediated settlement. In 1980, the path to divorce was almost always through a courtroom. It was an adversarial process designed to produce a winner and a loser. Today, the demographic of people choosing litigation is shrinking. Mediation and collaborative divorce have become the preferred methods for the educated middle class. This process involves a step-by-step negotiation facilitated by a neutral third party, focusing on interest-based bargaining rather than legal posturing. The data shows that couples who use mediation are more likely to adhere to their custody and support agreements over the long term. It is a more civil, less expensive, and faster way to reach the end of a marriage, and it is a major factor in reducing the long-term psychological trauma for children like Chloe. However, even with better tools and more information, there is a lingering question that the data hasn't fully answered. If we are getting better at managing divorce, and if the rates are dropping for the most stable among us, why does it still feel like the American family is in a state of constant flux? The answer might lie in the way we now define family itself. A century ago, family was a fixed unit. Today, it is a fluid demographic. We are moving toward a future where a family isn't defined by a legal certificate, but by a rotating set of commitments and shared responsibilities. But as these legal and social structures become more flexible, a new and unexpected trend is emerging in the 2026 data. While the secular divorce rate stabilizes, there is a growing divide in how different cultural and religious communities are navigating the modern world. Some are doubling down on traditionalism, while others are creating entirely new models of partnership that defy the old married versus divorced binary. In the next part, we will explore the demographics of the belief gap. We will look at how modern spirituality, secularism, and the return of traditional values are creating a fractured landscape where your zip code and your worldview are the ultimate predictors of whether your marriage will last a lifetime or become another statistic in the next century of change. The landscape of American divorce in 2026 is defined by a paradox: a growing belief gap that has created two entirely different marital realities within the same country. To understand this, we must look at how worldview and geography act as the ultimate sorting mechanism. Imagine a couple named Thomas and Elena. Thomas grew up in a secular, high-density urban environment in New England, while Elena was raised in a traditional, religiously active community in the rural South. If they were to marry in 1950, their social expectations would have been largely synchronized by a singular national culture. But in 2026, their backgrounds represent two distinct demographic trajectories with vastly different potential outcomes. Historical trends show that religious involvement remains one of the strongest predictors of marital longevity, though not for the reasons most people assume. Data from 2024 and 2025 indicates that regular attendance at religious services is associated with a 14% lower risk of divorce. However, this isn't just about dogma, it is about the communal dimension. When a couple like Elena's parents is embedded in a religious institution, they aren't just two people in a contract. They are part of a social network that provides external scaffolding. This includes access to low-cost marriage counseling, shared moral frameworks that prioritize commitment over individual happiness, and a social circle that reinforces the marital bond. In these communities, the threshold for leaving is higher because the social cost of a split involves more than just a legal filing. It involves a potential severance from one's entire support system. In contrast, consider the secular demographic where Thomas resides. For those with no religious affiliation, the risk of divorce is approximately 14% higher than for their religious counterparts. In secular urban centers, marriage is often viewed through the lens of individual fulfillment. If the relationship ceases to provide a high level of personal satisfaction or spark, the cultural permission to exit is significantly higher. However, this is balanced by the trend of selective marriage. Because this demographic often delays marriage until they have achieved higher educational and financial milestones, they are entering partnerships with a more robust internal foundation. Step by step, we are seeing a shift where secular marriages are fewer in number, but increasingly stable because they are being treated as a high-stakes choice rather than a social requirement. This brings us to the geographic sorting of the United States. If you look at the refined divorce rates for 2024, which measure divorces per 1,000 married women, the regional disparity is staggering. The states with the highest divorce rates are consistently concentrated in the South and the West. In 2024, Oklahoma led the nation with a refined divorce rate of 20.7, followed closely by Nevada at 19.9, Mississippi at 19.2, and Arkansas at 5.3 per 1,000 total population. Why does a state like Oklahoma, located in the heart of the Bible Belt, have double the divorce rate of a state like New Jersey? The answer lies in the intersection of age and economics. In high divorce states, the median age at first marriage is significantly lower, often between 22 and 24. Historical trends are unforgiving on this point. Couples who marry before age 18 face a 48% divorce rate within 10 years, while those who wait until after 25 see that risk drop to 25%. In many southern states, cultural pressure to marry young, combined with lower average incomes and less access to higher education, creates a perfect storm for marital instability. They are pro-marriage in sentiment, but the demographic reality of marrying young, and with fewer resources, leads to a higher turnover rate. Conversely, the Northeast represents the stability belt. States like Maine, New Jersey, and Massachusetts consistently report the lowest refined divorce rates in the country, with Maine hitting a low of 10.0 in 2024. In these regions, the cultural script is different. The expectation is to finish graduate school, secure a career, and achieve financial independence before seeking a spouse. New Jersey currently holds the highest marriage-to-divorce ratio in the country at 3.04, meaning for every one divorce, there are over 3 new marriages. This isn't necessarily because people in New Jersey are better at marriage, but because they are waiting until they have the cognitive and financial maturity to select a compatible partner. We must also examine the belief gap through the lens of case studies involving modern spirituality. In 2026, we are seeing the rise of the spiritually independent demographic, people who identify as spiritual but not religious. This group often struggles the most with marital stability because they lack both the traditional scaffolding of organized religion and the clear-headed, data-driven pragmatism of the purely secular. They often enter marriage with high idealistic expectations for soulmate connection, but lack the conflict resolution tools provided by a communal tradition or professional education. Step by step, when the initial spiritual high of the relationship fades, this group sees a higher rate of incompatibility filings. Furthermore, the data on 2026 reveals a fascinating subdemographic: the return of the traditionalist. In response to the high volatility of the last century, a small but growing segment of Gen Z is opting for covenant marriages or high-commitment religious models. These are marriages where the legal and social barriers to divorce are intentionally set higher by the couple themselves. While it is too early to see the long-term potential outcomes, early case studies suggest that this group experiences higher initial marital satisfaction, though researchers warn of the pressure cooker effect if the relationship becomes unhealthy and the exit ramps have been intentionally destroyed. As we look at these numbers, a clear picture emerges. America is no longer one country with one set of divorce statistics. It is a collection of demographic islands. On one island, marriage is a youthful, high-risk, high-turnover event. On another, it is a delayed, elite, and highly stable achievement. And in between, millions of Americans are trying to navigate a world where the old rules have disappeared, but the new ones haven't quite finished loading. This divide isn't just about who stays together. It's about the legacy they leave behind. If your zip code and your education level are the strongest predictors of your marriage's success, what does that mean for the next generation of American children? Are we moving toward a future where stable family life is a luxury good available only to the top 20% of the population? And as the gray divorce trend continues to accelerate among the boomers, how will the massive transfer of wealth be impacted by a generation of seniors who are splitting their assets in their 70s? The stakes of this divide are higher than they have ever been. In the next part, we are going into the deep end of the silver splitters. We will investigate why the generation that invented the modern nuclear family is now the one leading the charge in dismantling it, and how the gray divorce epidemic is set to trigger a multi-trillion-dollar financial shift that will redefine the American economy in the late 2020s. To understand the current year 2026, we have to look at the most explosive demographic shift in the history of American marriage: the gray divorce. While younger generations are waiting longer to marry and staying together at higher rates, the baby boomer generation, the very group that invented the modern nuclear family, is now leading the charge in dismantling it. This is not a minor trend. It is a fundamental restructuring of the American senior life. For people aged 65 and older, the divorce rate has tripled since the 1990s, and for those over 50, it has doubled. Imagine a woman named Linda, age 62, living in Florida. Linda has been married to her husband, Robert, for 35 years. They raised 3 children, paid off a mortgage, and accumulated a combined retirement nest egg of $800,000. In the 1950s, a couple in this position would likely stay together until death, regardless of their happiness, due to overwhelming social stigma and economic dependency. But in 2026, Linda is part of a generation of women who have had careers, higher education, and their own financial identities. When the empty nest becomes too quiet and the realization hits that she might have 20 or 30 healthy years left, Linda decides that fine is no longer enough. She files for divorce. This scenario is playing out in record numbers, especially in states like California and Florida, which see the highest volume of gray divorces in the country. But the potential outcomes for Linda and Robert are far more complex than for a couple in their 20s. When you divorce at 62, you are not just splitting a life, you are splitting a finished product. You don't have 30 years of earning potential left to rebuild what you lose. This is the financial cliff of the silver splitter. Historical trends show that gray divorce is an economic catastrophe for women and a severe setback for men. On average, women's standard of living drops by a staggering 45% after a later life divorce, while men experience a 21% decline. Both genders typically lose approximately half of their total wealth overnight. For Linda, splitting that $800,000 retirement account means she now has $400,000 to last the rest of her life. In a 2026 economy where healthcare costs and housing remain high, that math is pitiless. Research indicates that gray divorce women are 9 times more likely to live in poverty than their married peers, with 27% of gray divorced women over age 63 falling below the poverty line. Step by step, the wealth destruction of gray divorce ripples through the entire U.S. economy. Consider the housing market. For decades, the goal of the American dream was to own a home outright by retirement. Gray divorce forces the sale of these long-held assets. Instead of one paid-off home, you now have 2 individuals needing separate housing, often competing for smaller condos or apartments, further squeezing an already tight real estate market. This has led to the downsizing mandate of 2026, where 32% of those who divorce after 50 anticipate needing to move into smaller, less expensive homes just to survive. Case studies also highlight the invisible asset trap. Unlike younger couples, boomers often have complex pension plans and social security ties. Many women who spent years as primary caregivers find themselves with significantly lower social security benefits. While they may be entitled to a portion of their ex-spouse's benefits, the rules are rigid. Furthermore, only 25% of over 50s who divorce actually include pensions in their settlement discussions, and nearly a third give up rights to their partner's pension altogether, a mistake that can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. But why is this happening now? Sociologists point to increased longevity as a primary driver. In 1900, the average life expectancy was 47. Today, a 65-year-old can reasonably expect to live well into their 80s or 90s. The prospect of spending another quarter century in an unsatisfying relationship is a powerful motivator for change. Women, in particular, are the primary initiators of gray divorce, often citing verbal or emotional stagnation and a desire for a third act of personal growth. They are in a better position than their mothers were, with the autonomy to choose a fulfilling life over a traditional one. However, there is a hidden demographic impact on the next generation. We are seeing the rise of the inheritance interruption. As boomers split their assets and spend their remaining capital on separate households and increased cost of living expenses, the multi-trillion-dollar wealth transfer expected to go to millennials and Gen Z is being diluted. 1 in 5 gray divorced individuals say they may no longer be able to leave an inheritance, and 17% feel they will struggle to support their adult children financially in the future. The safety net of the American family is being shredded at both ends. As we move through 2026, the gray divorce epidemic is forcing a total rethink of retirement planning. It is no longer enough to plan for the couple. Individuals must now plan for the statistical possibility of being single in their 70s. This has given rise to new financial products and legal strategies specifically designed for later life transitions, including silver prenups for second and third marriages, which are statistically much riskier than first ones. But what happens when this desire for autonomy meets the digital age? As seniors navigate their new single lives, they are entering a world of dating and connection that is governed by algorithms and social media. This leads us to a fascinating and often overlooked demographic: the role of technology in both causing and curing the modern divorce. In the next part, we will explore the digital paper trail. We will investigate how social media, dating apps, and even AI are not just changing how we meet, but how we break up. From digital infidelity to the way your smartphone can become the star witness in a 2026 divorce court, the intersection of tech and marriage is deeper and more dangerous than you think. The digital transformation of the American marriage is not just about how couples meet. It is about the permanent, searchable record they leave behind. In 1926, if a spouse was unfaithful or hiding assets, the evidence was physical. A handwritten letter tucked in a coat pocket, a mysterious receipt in a wallet, or a hushed conversation overheard by a neighbor. By 2026, the evidence is microscopic, encrypted, and nearly impossible to truly delete. This has created a new demographic of divorce, the high-tech split, where the smartphone has become the most dangerous witness in the courtroom. Imagine a man named Marcus living in a high-tech hub like San Jose. Marcus has been married to his wife, Sophia, for 12 years. On the surface, their marriage is stable, but Marcus has been maintaining a secondary life through an encrypted messaging app. In the 1990s, Marcus might have gone undetected for years, but in 2026, his digital footprint is a liability. It is not just the messages themselves, it is the metadata. His fitness tracker shows he was active at 2 a.m. when he claimed to be asleep. His ride-sharing app history shows frequent trips to a specific address that does not align with his office or his gym. Even his smart home thermostat recorded a change in temperature settings while Sophia was out of town, suggesting a guest was present. This is the reality of the digital paper trail. Historical trends show that digital evidence is now cited in over 80% of divorce cases in the United States. While no-fault divorce laws mean you do not technically need to prove infidelity to end the marriage, digital evidence is used aggressively in 2026 to settle disputes over asset division, alimony, and child custody. Case studies reveal that financial infidelity, the act of hiding money in offshore digital wallets or secret accounts, is frequently uncovered through a step-by-step forensic audit of a spouse's browser history and app download logs. If Marcus downloaded a specific cryptocurrency exchange app 3 days before a large withdrawal from their joint savings account, the digital breadcrumbs are impossible to ignore. Furthermore, we must look at the demographic of social media-induced friction. In 2026, the phenomenon of Facebook divorce, or Instagram envy, has evolved into a more complex psychological drain. Constant exposure to the curated, idealized lives of others creates a baseline of marital dissatisfaction that sociologists call the comparison trap. For younger cohorts like Gen Z and late millennials, the pressure to maintain a perfect digital brand as a couple can lead to a sudden and public collapse when the reality of the relationship fails to match the feed. This has led to the rise of the social media prenup, a legal clause where couples agree on how they will handle their digital presence, photos, and public announcements in the event of a split. The potential outcomes of these digital habits extend into the world of parental alienation and custody. In 2026, family courts are increasingly flooded with screenshot evidence. One parent might capture a disparaging comment made by the other in a private group chat or a photo showing a parent in a compromising situation while they were supposed to be supervising the children. Step by step, these digital snapshots are being used to build profiles of parental fitness. The psychological impact on the demographic of children is profound. They are growing up in an era where their parents' most private conflicts are archived forever in a cloud-based legal file. We also need to analyze the demographic shift caused by the democratization of information. In 1926, if you wanted to know your rights in a divorce, you had to pay a high-priced attorney just to get the basic facts. In 2026, the DIY divorce demographic has exploded. With access to AI-driven legal tools, state-specific filing portals, and community forums, more Americans are navigating the process without traditional representation. Historical trends indicate that approximately 30% of divorces in some jurisdictions are now handled pro se, meaning the individuals represent themselves. This is particularly prevalent among the middle class, who have too many assets for legal aid, but not enough to justify a $50,000 legal battle. However, this self-service model comes with significant risks. Case studies from 2026 show that individuals who use automated tools often miss the nuances of tax liability or future retirement valuations. They might successfully file the paperwork, but they unknowingly sign away their right to a portion of a pension or agree to an equitable split that actually leaves them with a massive tax bill. The step-by-step guidance provided by an algorithm can solve the how of filing, but it often fails to address the why of complex financial strategy. Then there is the issue of digital assets themselves. In 2026, a couple's wealth is no longer just in the bank. It is in domain names, monetized social media accounts, high-level gaming characters with real-world value, and non-fungible tokens. If Sophia spent 5 years building an e-commerce brand on a social platform, that brand has a valuation. Dividing a personal brand in a divorce is a demographic nightmare. Who gets the followers? Who gets the future ad revenue? In 2026, specialized digital asset evaluators are being brought into mediation to put a dollar amount on a TikTok handle. This technological layer has added a level of surveillance and complexity to the American household that is fundamentally changing how we view trust. If your partner can track your location in real time and your bank can alert your spouse to every purchase, the private life that sustained many marriages in the 20th century has vanished. We are seeing a demographic shift toward radical transparency in successful marriages, but also radical evasion in those that are failing. But as the digital world makes it easier to catch a spouse in a lie, it also makes it easier for people to find an exit. The dating app Afterlife is a major driver of the gray divorce we discussed earlier. A 60-year-old in 1926 was largely limited to their immediate social circle for a second chance at love. A 60-year-old in 2026 has a global marketplace of potential partners at their fingertips. This accessibility has lowered the switching cost of a marriage. If you are unhappy, the digital world provides immediate proof that you are not alone and that other options are available. This leads us to a critical question. In a world of total surveillance, digital assets, and infinite options, is the very concept of marriage becoming obsolete? Or is it simply evolving into something we have never seen before? As we look at the final chapters of this century of change, we have to look at the post-divorce society. We are moving into a future where the traditional family unit is being replaced by micro-communities of choice. In the next part, we will explore the rise of the platonic marriage and the solo parenting by choice demographics. We will look at how 2026 is seeing a return to communal living and how the failure of the 20th century marriage model is sparking a 21st century revolution in how we define a home. The data suggests that the end of divorce might actually come because we finally stopped getting married in the way our grandparents did. The shift toward 21st century relationship models in the year 2026 is not merely a social trend. It is a structural response to a century of marital volatility. For decades, the American public operated under a monolithic definition of family: one man, one woman, and their biological children, bound by a legal contract that was difficult to enter and even more difficult to exit. But as the divorce demographics of the 1980s and 1990s proved the fragility of that model, a new demographic has emerged that prioritizes the stability of the household over the romantic longevity of the parents. This is the era of the intentional community and the rise of the platonic co-parenting agreement. Imagine a woman named Maya living in Portland. Maya is 38, a successful software architect, and has no interest in a traditional romantic marriage. However, Maya deeply desires to raise a child in a stable, two-adult household. In 1926, Maya's only options would have been to marry for convenience or remain childless and face significant social stigma. In 2026, Maya enters into a legal co-parenting partnership with her longtime friend, Julian. They are not romantically involved, they do not share a bedroom, but they have signed a comprehensive legal framework that outlines their shared financial responsibilities, housing arrangements, and child-rearing philosophies. This is the emergence of the platonic marriage or parenting partnership. Historical trends show that a significant driver of divorce in the 20th century was the all-or-nothing expectation of the romantic spouse. We expected one person to be our best friend, our sexual partner, our co-parent, our financial advisor, and our primary emotional support. When one of those pillars crumbled, the entire structure fell, leading to the divorce spikes we analyzed in earlier parts. Case studies in 2026 suggest that by decoupling romance from the household contract, these new partnerships may actually offer more stability for the children involved. Because there is no romantic spark to lose, there is no emotional volatility to trigger a sudden split. The relationship is treated more like a high-stakes business venture where the product is a well-adjusted child. Step by step, we are seeing this reflect in the legal demographics of several states. California and Oregon have pioneered multi-parent laws, which allow more than two adults to have legal parental rights. This has opened the door for tribal living arrangements. Consider a household in 2026 where two divorced mothers, each with two children, decide to pool their resources and buy a large home together. They aren't just roommates. They are a functioning family unit. They share the mortgage, the childcare, and the domestic labor. In the eyes of the 2026 economy, this is a highly efficient demographic. They have the dual income power of a traditional marriage, but the resilience of a community. If one mother loses her job or falls ill, the household does not collapse. Furthermore, we must analyze the demographic of solo parenting by choice. Fueled by advancements in reproductive technology and a 2026 culture that no longer views single motherhood as a tragedy, a growing number of women in the top 10% of earners are choosing to bypass the marriage market entirely. Data from 2024 and 2025 indicates that the number of children born to single women by choice has risen by 15% in metropolitan areas. These women are not divorcees. They are never marrieds, who have calculated that the potential outcomes of a high-conflict divorce are worse than the challenges of solo parenting. They utilize their high incomes to build outsourced families, consisting of nannies, tutors, and support networks. However, this shift creates a new kind of belief gap that we touched on earlier. While the elite are experimenting with these new models of choice, the working class is often left with fragile families. These are households where the parents are not married, often not cohabitating, and lack the legal protections or financial resources to create stability. Historical trends suggest that without the anchor of a formal agreement, be it a marriage or a parenting contract, children in these demographics face much higher rates of household instability. In 2026, we are seeing a stark divide: intentional families for the wealthy and fluid families for the poor. This brings us to the concept of the beta marriage. In 2026, there is an increasing cultural conversation around term-limited marriage contracts. Imagine if, instead of "until death do us part," a marriage license came with a 5-year or 10-year renewal option. At the end of the term, the couple must actively choose to re-sign or allow the contract to lapse, which would trigger a pre-negotiated asset division. While this is not yet a legal reality in the US, The demographic interest in this model is high among Gen Z. They view the forever contract as a relic of an era where people lived to be 50. In a world where you might live to be 100, the idea of a single 60-year partnership feels statistically improbable to many. Case studies of late-stage cohabitation also show that even among those who do value romance, the legal part of the marriage is being discarded. Many couples in 2026 are opting for commitment ceremonies without a marriage license. This allows them to have the social and emotional benefits of marriage without the demographic trap of the divorce court. By staying legally single, they protect their individual assets and maintain their own credit scores. A vital strategy in an economy where a spouse's medical debt or student loans can ruin the other partner's financial future. This is the unbundling of the American family. We are taking the different pieces of marriage, the sex, the money, the kids, the house, and we are putting them into different boxes. You might have a romantic partner you don't live with, a co-parent you aren't in love with, and a roommate who shares your financial burdens. The century of change has taught the American public that the 1950s model was an anomaly, not the rule. Before the Industrial Revolution, families were often large, multi-generational, and community-based. In 2026, we aren't moving towards something new, as much as we are returning to a modernized version of the extended family. But as the legal definitions of family blur, the state is struggling to keep up. How do you calculate child support when there are 3 legal parents? How do you handle inheritance when a family consists of 3 unrelated adults and 4 children from different biological backgrounds? These are the legal frontiers of 2026. The demographic shift is moving faster than the legislature, creating a period of legal limbo for these new family models. As we look toward the end of this masterclass, we have to ask the final, most important question. If we have finally deconstructed marriage, what does the future of the American population actually look like? Are we heading toward a more stable society because we have stopped forcing everyone into a one-size-fits-all box? Or are we witnessing the slow-motion collapse of the fundamental unit of civilization? The answer can be found in the marriage forecast for the year 2030 and beyond. In the next part, we will look at the birth rate crisis and the marriage strike. We will investigate why a growing demographic of American men and women are choosing to opt out of the relationship market entirely, and what happens to a nation when the split isn't between 2 people, but between the people and the institution itself. The year 2026 has brought us to the doorstep of a demographic phenomenon that sociologists are calling the marriage strike. While the 20th century was defined by the struggle of how to exit a marriage, the 21st century is increasingly defined by a growing number of Americans who are refusing to enter one at all. This is not just a delay in the age of first marriage. It is a fundamental opting out of the relationship market that is reshaping the American population pyramid. To understand this, we must look at the divergence in how men and women perceive the cost-benefit analysis of a legal union in the modern era. Imagine a man named Tyler, age 28, living in a suburban area of Ohio. Tyler has watched his older brothers and his father navigate the complexities of the family court system. He sees the potential outcomes of a divorce, the division of assets, the ongoing child support obligations, and the potential for limited access to his future children, as a high-stakes risk with very little perceived reward. In Tyler's worldview, the legal contract of marriage offers him no protections that he cannot achieve through a simple cohabitation agreement or by remaining single. Historical trends show that young men like Tyler are increasingly citing financial self-preservation and a fear of the adversarial nature of divorce court as their primary reasons for avoiding the altar. Simultaneously, we must consider the perspective of a woman named Jasmine, also aged 28, in Atlanta. Jasmine is part of the most educated and economically mobile generation of women in American history. Unlike her grandmother in 1926, Jasmine does not need a husband to secure a mortgage, sign a contract, or provide social status. She has observed the second shift phenomenon, where women in dual-income households still perform the vast majority of unpaid domestic labor and childcare. For Jasmine, the risk of a bad marriage is not just emotional. It is a direct threat to her career trajectory and her financial independence. Case studies from 2025 and 2026 indicate that many women are choosing solo living because they find that the emotional labor of maintaining a modern partnership often outweighs the benefits of a shared household. This dual-sided opting out has led to a record low in the U.S. marriage rate. In 1960, there were roughly 73 marriages for every 1,000 unmarried women. By 2024, that number had plummeted to approximately 28 per 1,000. In 2026, the data suggests we are approaching a tipping point, where the majority of adults under the age of 35 will have never been married. This is the relationship market split. We are seeing a demographic polarization where marriage is becoming a luxury good for the wealthy and highly educated, while the rest of the population either cohabitates without legal protection or remains single. Step by step, this strike is creating a massive downstream effect on the U.S. birth rate. For the last century, marriage and childbearing were inextricably linked. While the unbundling we discussed in earlier parts has allowed for more children to be born outside of marriage, the overall fertility rate in America has dropped below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman. In 2026, we are seeing the potential outcomes of a society that is not replacing its population. This leads to an aging workforce and an increased burden on social safety nets. The divorce century has inadvertently created a singlehood century, and the economic machinery of the United States is not currently built to support a population of single-person households. Furthermore, we must analyze the demographic of the digital recluse. A significant portion of the marriage strike is driven by the rise of digital substitutes for physical intimacy and companionship. In 2026, the availability of high-fidelity entertainment, social media, and even AI-driven companionship has lowered the biological and emotional urgency to seek out a partner. Historical trends suggest that as digital engagement increases, physical social interactions, and by extension, the formation of romantic bonds, decrease. This is particularly prevalent among young men, a demographic that is increasingly reporting zero romantic or sexual partners in a given year. Case studies in 2026 also reveal the legal freeze. Because the laws surrounding common law marriage and palimony vary so wildly from state to state, many couples are living in a state of paralysis. They are afraid to marry because of the divorce laws, but they are also afraid to move in together because they don't understand the potential legal liabilities of cohabitation. In states like Washington or California, where committed intimate relationships can sometimes carry the same asset-sharing burdens as marriage, the strike is even more pronounced. People are choosing to date apart or maintain living apart together, LAT relationships to keep their financial lives completely insulated. We must also look at the role of relationship trauma as a demographic driver. The children of the 1980s and 90s divorce boom are now the primary actors in the 2026 economy. Many of these individuals carry a generational hangover from their parents' splits. They have seen the worst-case scenario up close, and it has made them hypervigilant. Step by step, this caution has led to a vetting culture, where potential partners are put through rigorous financial and psychological screening before even a second date. In 2026, it is common for individuals to request a credit score or a background check before entering a serious relationship. While this helps prevent bad matches, it also significantly slows down the rate of household formation. However, the marriage strike is not just about individuals saying no. It is about the institution of marriage failing to adapt to the 2026 reality. The legal framework of marriage in most U.S. states is still based on a model from the mid-20th century. A model that assumes one primary earner and one domestic manager. When both partners are earners and both are managers, the old laws regarding alimony and equitable distribution often feel punitive or outdated to both parties. Until the legal demographics of marriage are patched to reflect the 50-50 reality of the modern home, the strike is likely to continue. This brings us to a critical realization. The century of change has reached its logical conclusion. We have moved from marriage as a social requirement to marriage as a personal choice, and finally to marriage as a calculated risk. The demographics show us that the American public is becoming increasingly risk-averse in their personal lives, mirroring their risk aversion in the post-2020 economy. We are a nation of singularities, individual units moving through a digital landscape, wary of the entanglements that defined our grandparents' lives. But what happens to the human heart in a world of pure calculation? As we reach the final part of this masterclass, we have to look beyond the data and the spreadsheets. We have to look at the future. Is there a new marriage on the horizon? Are we on the verge of a great reconciliation, where we build a new version of the American family that is actually divorce-proof, because it is based on something more resilient than the models of the past? In the final part, we will synthesize everything we have learned, from the no-fault revolution to the digital paper trail, to give you the State of the Union for 2030. We will look at the emerging signs of hope and the radical new ways Americans are finding connection in a disconnected world. The end of this century of change is not a tragedy. It is a transformation, and the final chapter will reveal exactly where you and your family fit into the new American landscape. The American landscape in 2026 is no longer defined by a single monolithic family structure, but by a diverse ecosystem of relationship models that are more adaptive and resilient than anything we saw in the 20th century. To understand the future, we must look at the emergence of the divorce-proof generation. This isn't a generation that has somehow solved the mystery of human compatibility. Rather, it is a demographic that has moved away from the high-risk, low-information marriage models of the past and toward a high-transparency, data-driven approach to partnership. Imagine a couple named Leo and Mia, both 31, living in a suburban community in North Carolina in early 2026. Unlike their grandparents, who married in 1965 with little more than a shared church background and a hope for the future, Leo and Mia have approached their union with the precision of a corporate merger. Before their wedding, they engaged in a year of premarital coaching that focused specifically on financial literacy and conflict resolution. They drafted a postnuptial agreement that outlines how their separate and joint assets will be handled, and they have established a monthly financial summit to review their household budget. For Leo and Mia, the potential outcomes of their marriage are not left to chance. They are actively managed through a series of intentional, step-by-step habits. Historical trends suggest that this level of intentionality is the primary reason why the divorce rate for first-time marriages among college-educated professionals is continuing to decline as we head toward 2030. We are seeing the rise of the specialized marriage. In this model, the partnership is not just a romantic union, but a strategic alliance designed to survive the economic and social volatility of the 21st century. Case studies from 2025 and 2026 show that couples who treat their marriage as a project requiring constant maintenance and clear communication are significantly more likely to cross the 10 and 20-year milestones without a legal split. But the transformation goes deeper than just better preparation. We must analyze the shift in the social contract itself. In the mid-20th century, the social contract of marriage was based on stability and security. In 2026, the contract is based on growth and flexibility. This is what sociologists call the fluid family unit. While the divorce rates for older Americans continue to remain high due to the gray divorce phenomenon we discussed earlier, the new households being formed today are built on a foundation of dual independence. Because both partners typically have their own careers, retirement accounts, and social networks, the death grip of economic necessity that kept unhappy couples together in 1926 is gone. This paradoxically makes the marriages that do survive much stronger, as they are based on a daily choice to remain together rather than a lack of alternatives. Furthermore, we are seeing the emergence of the reconciled demographic. These are individuals who have experienced the fallout of a divorce in their younger years and are now entering second marriages with a completely different mindset. In 1980, a second marriage was often a rebound attempt to recreate the nuclear family. In 2026, second marriages are increasingly defined by living apart together, or LAT arrangements. Case studies show that older couples are finding success by maintaining separate residences, even while being legally married. This allows them to preserve their individual inheritances for their children from previous marriages and avoid the domestic frictions that often lead to a second split. By 2026, the LAT model has become a recognized and respected demographic category in the American family landscape. Step by step, the technology that once facilitated the digital paper trail of infidelity is now being repurposed to support marital longevity. We are seeing the rise of relationship health apps that use behavioral data to alert couples to patterns of withdrawal or escalating conflict before they reach a breaking point. AI-driven mediators are being used not just to settle divorces, but to facilitate recommitment negotiations, where couples can update their marital contracts as their lives change. This technological scaffolding is helping the 2026 demographic bridge the gap between their romantic intentions and the reality of long-term partnership. We must also look at the demographic of the new traditionalist. While the secular world experiments with fluid models, a growing segment of the population is returning to highly traditional, community-focused marriage models as a reaction to the perceived chaos of the divorce revolution. However, these 2026 traditionalists are different from those of 1926. They are choosing traditional roles with a full understanding of the historical data. They are utilizing the lessons of the past to build intentional traditionalism, where roles are negotiated and agreed upon rather than assumed. This group represents a stabilizing force in the national divorce statistics, as their communities provide the high social cost for splitting that we discussed in Part 5. As we look toward the 2030 forecast, the most important takeaway from this century of change is the end of the average. There is no longer an average American marriage or an average American divorce. We have moved into a world of extremes. On one hand, we have high-conflict, high-volatility relationships that end quickly and often repeatedly. On the other, we have fortified marriages that are more stable and fulfilling than any in history. The 50% statistic is effectively dead. Your personal risk of divorce in 2026 is determined almost entirely by your specific demographic markers: your age at marriage, your education level, your financial transparency, and your community support. This masterclass has traced the journey from the rigid, fault-based courtrooms of 1900 to the no-fault explosion of the 1970s, through the gray divorce epidemic of the 2010s, and finally to the selective marriage era of 2026. The data shows us that we are not witnessing the death of the family, but its metamorphosis. The American family is becoming smaller, more diverse, more intentional, and increasingly digital. It is a structure that is harder to enter, but once formed, is being built with higher quality materials. As we conclude this deep dive, we return to the question of the American landscape. Where do you fit into this century of change? Whether you are a silver splitter seeking a second act, a cautious cohort member delaying your first union, or a new traditionalist seeking a return to roots, the data of the last 100 years is your roadmap. The coin flip of 1980 is gone. In its place is a complex, high-information environment where the potential outcomes are largely shaped by the steps you take before the paperwork is ever signed. The transformation is complete. We have moved from a society of obligation to a society of choice. And while choice brings the risk of the split, it also brings the possibility of a partnership that is more honest, more equitable, and more resilient than anything our grandparents could have imagined. The century of change has taught us that the strength of a nation is not found in the rigidity of its contracts, but in the adaptability of its people. As we move past 2026 and toward the mid-century, the American family remains the core of the demographic story, not as a relic of the past, but as a laboratory for the future. This has been the definitive masterclass on the demographics of divorce in America. While this concludes our look at the statistics and the history, it only begins the conversation about what happens next. In our next deep dive series, we will transition from the household to the individual, investigating the rise of the single-person economy. We will look at how the millions of Americans who have opted out of the marriage market are permanently altering the way we build cities, the way we design housing, and the way we fund the future of the United States. The shift has happened, the world is different, and the data is just getting started.